Earlier this year, Governor Rick Snyder appointed an emergency financial manager to the Highland Park Public Schools. Then, Jack Martin, the emergency manager, was deactivated from his position by the governor. Joining us is Bert Johnson, the state senator from Highland Park, who has created a commission to help communities fix their own problems without a state takeover. We welcome you to Am I Right this morning.
Thank you for having me, as
always.
always.
Great to have you.
Well, Senator, you saw the governor throwing up his hands more or less and saying, okay, I'm going to remove Jack Martin. Highland Park, you solve your own problems, Highland Park schools. Can Highland Park schools solve their own problems? Is this district going to survive without state help?
Oh, I think it can, and I think there was a little bit of taking his ball and going home, so to speak. You know, we all live with
Why wouldn't he?
Well, we all sort of live with the consequences of what we do politically. It's like an occupational hazard that you can be recalled if people don't like what you do, and people always have the right to address their government through petition. And so what we're seeing here is people activating themselves and saying that there is a better way, there ought to be a better way to solve some of these problems. No one's denying that there's an almost $12 million problem in the city of Highland Park with the school district, but I think the systemic problem, the one that no one really wants to be accountable to and understand, is that over 40, 50 years of disinvestment in these enclaves. You look at the one common denominator, people have simply said, well, 53% or so of African Americans across the state would be under emergency management if it persists. But the real common denominator here is the fact that Ecorse, Benton Harbor, Flint, Muskegon Heights, Detroit, Highland Park, Detroit Public Schools are all victim to mass and gross disinvestment over a number of years. If it can be said that capital assets are buildings, well, in this case, in poor urban areas, there's children who demand foundation allowance that continues to support the cities. And so that's why we're here. But it doesn't mean that you don't let locals have some say.
Okay, but Bert, you talked about this investment. That is one of the highest per pupil funded districts in the state.
Well,
you're in the top 5%. You're one of the highest.
We have to be honest about that, because that's not all state money, and it's not.
It doesn't matter. Well, it's money that's being spent.
Let me tell you why it matters.
You guys are still in financial problems over there.
I'll tell you why it does matter, because $16,000 is not simply the state allocation. It's actually a combination of the state allocation and federal dollars that are being used for after-school programming and whatnot. It does not all go simply to the classroom. Look, there's been a lot of mismanagement. We'll admit that. There's probably been some corruption, like was uncovered in DPS. But that can be said for probably about the 700 or so underperforming schools across this state that are in fact going to make it into what is going to be known as the EAA. We've got to have a conversation about that. What I'm saying to you, Nolan, is Highland Park is not simply an anomaly. It's a symptom of a larger disease that we need to label as disinvestment. So
what's your answer? Because who's suffering are the kids.
Sure,
the kids
sure.
Whose future is being destroyed by the lack of all of these issues being addressed. So what is your answer? Well,
I think the answer is simple. Number one, the state is on the clock. So there needs to be a piece of public policy that is in place that gives the treasurer an opportunity to oversee, see these problems coming early, and get in and remediate it. But I don't think when you begin to supplant the locals that you're putting a good solution on the table. You're going to have to put some money down in these areas. And I'm not simply the state, and people are on the clock in Highland Park. They're paying this debt. 18 mills goes to the schools. You do have to understand that a combination of those resources has to be spent more right. And so you bring the state in, keep the locals in. You don't necessarily cede them all to control if they've mismanaged, like we believe that has happened.
What are you talking about? A consent agreement? I guess I don't get what you're talking about.
No, we're talking about a brand new piece of...
You want state money and state oversight and not an emergency manager.
We have to have a brand new piece of legislation. And the reason I say that, Nolan, is you have to admit what's going on right now. We have a petition drive that's going to stop this law from being utilized across the state. Even the state treasurer has admitted to me we're going to have to fashion up a new public policy to deal with this.
So what is that? Tell people who are listening what that new piece of public policy is.
Well, I think
What's the answer?
I think there's going to be some blend of state oversight and local intervention, and maybe it's consent agreements going forward, but it's got to be something new. Public Act 72 was not necessarily the worst thing that was ever created. And there were instances in which cities were able to come out of those holes, and Hamtramck's one, Flint was one, Ecorse was one. We've seen them back, so we know that it didn't work completely. But we've got to go back to the drawing board, and I'll simply say this. Republicans fashioned up Public Act 4 on their own and would not let Democrats have any say. I don't say that to be unfair or political. That's the truth. We're going to have to get back to the table together to do it.
Okay, but Senator, you've run out of money in Highland Park, and now new piece of legislation is going to take a bit of time to get enacted. whether the state is going to write a check and let the officials who squandered and put Highland Park in this amount of debt, let them continue to spend state dollars, that's a long shot. What do you do today to keep those schools open between now and June?
Well, I think we've seen what they're willing to do, and that is to say that the Michigan Constitution says that any school-age child has an opportunity to receive a free public education. And so the bill that was passed almost 2 weeks ago now did, in fact, push some emergency dollars into place to keep kids in the classroom, to keep teachers paid and whatnot. But let me just simply say this. We can't ignore the fact that what is on the table is an opportunity to look at the entire state, all of these districts and all of these cities approaching insolvency, and do something right in an honest way that gives us an opportunity to move forward.
Now, meanwhile, you've got kids leaving Highland Park schools, other school districts and charter schools taking them. Will the district survive?
I think the district can survive, given the state's want for it to survive. Nobody can ignore what's happening in DPS. When Robert Bobb left under this same Public Act, $363 million of debt. Public Act 4 does not work. So I'm not saying that to be political. Let's get rid of it. Let's scrap it for what it is. Let's put a real piece of public policy in place. And no one can deny that when cities are actually paying through their meals to support their public schools, that is going to have to continue to be money used to educate kids in a public fashion.
I have one quick question. Do we
And there are
have
no quick
too
fixes.
many school districts?
Absolutely.
Do we need to consolidate
Without
school
question.
districts?
Absolutely. We have way too many school districts. We have way too many townships. We have way too much government across the state. At the risk of sounding like a Republican, we need to consolidate.
Way too much government's not working very well. Senator, thank you. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to you for joining us. I'm Nolan Finley.
And I'm Debbie Dingle. We'll see you next time.